I think in terms of MVP, it may not be in this order, but to me, it's A'ja Wilson, surprise, surprise, Olivia Miles,
Kelsey Mitchell.
Can I get there?
Oh, my bad.
Kelsey Mitchell, Paige Beckers. Those are my 4. I think you could swap, but I think Olivia Miles gets the edge just because they're the #1 team in the league. You know, they're head and shoulders, I would say, above.
Something strange just happened inside the Indiana Fever, and it has Caitlin Clark fans asking serious questions. When Aaliyah Boston was asked about the MVP race, her answer seemed to leave Caitlin out. Was it just her personal opinion, or could there be something deeper going on between two of Indiana's biggest stars? And why did Boston's choice get people talking so quickly?
Involving Aaliyah Boston and Caitlin Clark. Of course, we know Caitlin would say, oh, well, you know, it's no big deal. She would take the high road. We know that. The other thing that Aaliyah Boston was asked was, who's the MVP? She answered, Kelsey Mitchell, with no bringing up of Caitlin Clark, which is wild to me. Now, guys, in case you have not noticed, I have noticed. Have you caught how many times Aaliyah Boston has looked off Caitlin Clark?
The strangest part of the WNBA MVP race may not be who is actually leading. It may be who some people are leaving out, even though that player is in the same locker room, running the same offense, and helping create the chances that other players are getting praised for.
You wanted the attention. You wanted to be a big girl league. You wanted to put yourself on the same level of other professional basketball, football, baseball, hockey, whatever leagues across the country. So you are now because of one woman, Caitlin Clark, and her popularity coming out of Iowa, the way she plays, the way she conducts herself. And y'all now are crying about it because you haven't handled it. Not you, Sophie Cunningham or Caitlin Clark. You as a league have handled it for...
That is exactly why Aaliyah Boston's MVP choice has caused such a strong reaction from Caitlin Clark fans. Boston has mentioned players like Paige Bueckers and Olivia Miles, but according to the reaction to her comments, Caitlin Clark's name has been noticeably missing from the conversation.
It is not digging what Aaliyah Boston did to Caitlin Clark when it comes down to this MVP situation. And I'm right there with him. I'm disgusted with what Aaliyah Boston did to Caitlin Clark. You embarrassed her. That was disrespectful. Boston, she is not to be trusted anymore. She's not to be trusted anymore. I don't believe she has Caitlin Clark's best interest. And now Skip Bayless is questioning the same thing.
And suddenly, fans are asking a very uncomfortable question. How can you play alongside Caitlin Clark and somehow leave her out of the MVP conversation? To understand why this has become such a big deal, you have to look beyond one answer and look at the bigger picture of the 2026 season.
The MVP. Now, guys, before you see the next video, this is the FanDuel and ESPN bet odds for MVP. A'ja Wilson's leading the way, then Olivia Miles, and then Caitlin Clark. So Caitlin Clark is currently third in the MVP betting odds. Kelsey Mitchell is on here at fifth. Caitlin Clark's a plus 2,200. Kelsey Mitchell's a plus 10,000. But I don't know if you guys have noticed, there has been a real true effort by the WNBA media to glaze Kelsey Mitchell for MVP.
Caitlin Clark is not simply putting up numbers and hoping people notice. She is playing in an environment where defenses know exactly where she is before the ball even crosses half court. Opponents can send multiple defenders toward her, bring help early, force the ball out of her hands, and make every possession feel like a small tactical battle. That matters because statistics do not tell the whole story. A player putting up big numbers while getting relatively open looks and another player producing similar or even better numbers while defenses build their entire game plan around stopping her are not facing the same level of difficulty. This is what makes the Clark MVP debate so interesting. If Paige Bueckers is your choice, people can understand the argument. Bueckers has been excellent for Dallas, and her numbers support a real MVP case. She was the 2025 Rookie of the Year and has become one of the league's most important young stars. Saying Bueckers belongs in the conversation is not wrong. But fans heard Boston's preference and immediately started asking another question. In what world is Caitlin Clark not even part of that conversation? Clark's 2026 numbers are not exactly easy to ignore. At the time of the WNBA's second All-Star voting returns, Clark was averaging 21.3 points and 8.2 assists per game, ranking third in scoring and second in assists. Boston, meanwhile, was averaging 16.6 points and 8.6 rebounds.
The top 3-point percentage leaders in the entire WNBA are all Caitlin Clark's teammates. So Aaliyah Boston's at number 1, which is ridiculous from a center. Sophie Cunningham's at number 2, and Kelsey Mitchell is at the 4th spot. People will say, points created, that's a made-up stat. Ask her teammates if that's a made-up stat, because Caitlin Clark is number 1 at that, number 1 in assists, and number 3 in points. So the opposing coaches know that Caitlin Clark is the only player in WNBA history to average 20 points and 8 assists in a season.
Those numbers matter because Caitlin Clark's value goes far beyond the points she scores. She creates opportunities for her teammates, stretches defenses across the court, creates open shots with her passing, controls the pace of the game, and draws so much defensive attention that it can change the entire floor. Most importantly, Clark has a way of making the players around her more dangerous, which is why some Fever fans have had a hard time understanding how her own teammate could leave her out of the MVP conversation. Aaliyah Boston is not watching Caitlin Clark from a TV studio or only seeing her highlights after the game. Boston sees what happens on the court every night, how the plays develop, and how often the ball reaches her in the perfect spot to finish a play. That is why the reaction from Clark supporters has been so strong. They are not necessarily saying Boston must choose Clark as her MVP just because they are teammates. They are asking why Clark's name seems to be missing from the conversation when Boston has a front-row view of the impact she makes every night.
Okay, so let's have a serious conversation. Caitlin Clark for MVP, question mark. Caitlin Clark gets my vote. And it's really only out of 2 people. And there's 3 people in the conversation. ESPN, which y'all even know is big haters of Caitlin Clark, even has her there. ESPN has it the same way I have it. The front runner being Aja Wilson, in the hunt being Olivia Miles and Caitlin Clark, and then people that's in the conversation, but they not in the real conversation. Kelsey Mitchell, Paige Beckers, they not in the real, the final.
Then Paige enters the discussion, and that makes the debate even more complicated. There is a real argument for Buchers. She has become one of the most impressive young players in the league, and her scoring, efficiency, playmaking, leadership, and impact on Dallas have made her a serious candidate for major individual awards. Nobody needs to ignore that just to defend Clark. However, Clark supporters are asking why Buchers seems to get more benefit of the doubt in these conversations. They argue that Clark is often judged much more harshly, even though the defensive attention around her changes the way she produces her numbers. Opposing teams do not treat her like an ordinary guard who can be left open for even a few seconds. When a player demands that much defensive attention, her full impact does not always show up in the box score. Sometimes her biggest contribution comes from what happens after the defense decides it has to stop her. That leads directly to the Olivia Miles part of the debate. Miles has also become one of the league's most exciting young guards, and it is easy to understand why she is included in major conversations. She has earned praise for her playmaking and overall impact, and being selected as an all-star starter only made the argument stronger that she belongs among the league's biggest young stars.
And the more I thought about it, the less I liked it, because I ask you, exactly what good does it do for Aaliyah Boston to say that publicly about Kelsey Mitchell when a lot of people out there think Caitlin Clark is making a bid for MVP? Not that that matters, but what good does that do Aaliyah Boston?
They get in front of these cameras and say anything. But you was real quiet about Sophie getting knocked over by DiJonai Carrington. You was quiet about Alyssa Thomas, but you was quiet about a lot of stuff. You ain't never pushed for Caitlin Clark to be MVP.
However, Clark supporters have started asking a question that is hard to ignore. Why does it sometimes feel like everyone else gets a clear path while Clark has to fight through traffic just to create the same opportunities? That may sound dramatic, but the basketball argument is simple. Fans believe Clark often faces defensive strategies designed specifically to make things difficult for her. While other players may have more freedom to operate, Clark can feel like she is playing in a three-point contest where everyone else gets an open shot while someone is standing right in front of her the entire time. Of course, nobody is actually standing in front of Clark with a chair during games, but the exaggeration explains what her supporters are trying to say. They believe the defensive attention Clark faces should be part of how her performance is judged because the difficulty of producing those numbers matters just as much as the numbers themselves. And that brings the controversy back to the relationship between Boston and Clark, because this is where the conversation becomes more than just statistics. Boston and Clark are teammates, and that makes the omission feel much more personal to fans than it would if the same opinion came from an analyst or a player on another team. If a TV commentator leaves Clark off an MVP list, fans can disagree and move on. If a rival player chooses someone else, fans can debate the decision and then wait for the next game.
And I see this getting out of hand, and it's just going further than where it's going. And it's a lot of people that's involved in too much feeling, whether that's hating on Caitlyn, whether that's trying to ride for Caitlyn's teammate. It's too much unnecessary stuff going on. And we just got to keep it real. Caitlyn is the only one on the Indiana Fever with a real chance of winning MVP. Like, y'all have to stop, bro. Indiana Fever fans, y'all doing a little too much.
When that opinion comes from a teammate, however, people immediately start looking for a deeper reason. Was it simply Boston's personal definition of an MVP? Does she care more about team success, efficiency, or another part of the game? Does she truly believe another player has had a better season? Or is she simply trying to avoid the huge social media reaction that seems to follow Caitlyn Clark everywhere? That last idea has made some fans especially suspicious. However, it is important to separate what fans believe from what is actually known. There is no clear evidence that Boston avoids praising Clark because she is worried about backlash or wants to stay on good terms with other players. Still, this helps explain why some fans have started comparing Boston's approach with Kelsey Mitchell's. Mitchell has often seemed much more comfortable supporting Clark publicly and recognizing the attention and opportunities that come from playing alongside one of the most recognizable young stars in basketball.
Their primary objective, their goal is to stop Caitlyn Clark. We've seen it. We see the full court press. We see the double teams. We see Breanna Stewart coming out guarding her, to Asia Wilson, the defensive player of the year, coming out and guarding her. So they use guards, they use centers. They don't game plan to stop Kelsey Mitchell, Leah Boston, Sophie Cunningham. And what that does is get open looks for all of them. We've seen Kelsey Mitchell's numbers before Caitlyn Clark. Great player, but nowhere near to where they were in 2024. This season, Caitlyn Clark got drafted. And then last year, she was in the top 4 in the MVP conversation. Caitlyn Clark didn't.
That difference has created an interesting contrast in Indiana because fans see teammates openly recognizing Clark's impact while viewing Boston's approach as much more reserved. Suddenly, a simple MVP choice has turned into something much bigger. It has become a discussion about personalities, relationships, public opinion, and even team chemistry. That may be completely unfair to Boston. The timing also makes the conversation harder to ignore because Clark has already shown that she is one of the most statistically important young players in the league. That does not automatically make Clark the MVP because awards are not given just because a player reaches a major statistical milestone. Still, it shows just how big her offensive impact has been since she entered the league.
You're CC's teammate, I thought. You're Caitlyn Clark's team. Aaliyah Boston, your top 4 should be Caitlyn Clark, Kelsey Mitchell, Caitlyn Clark, and Kelsey Mitchell. That's who your top 4 is. You shouldn't even give life to anybody else in the league. It should be number 1, Caitlyn Clark, number 2, Kelsey Mitchell, number 3, CC, number 4, Money Mitch. That's your top 4. But you don't even put Caitlyn Clark in your top 4? The Hub really outdid herself on this.
That is why the question of, where is Caitlyn, has become so loud. Clark does not need everyone to vote for her, and she does not need every player, analyst, coach, or fan to call her the best player in the league. She simply needs to be recognized as someone who belongs in the MVP conversation. At the same time, it is important not to turn this controversy into an unfair attack on Aaliyah Boston because Boston is having an impressive season of her own. She has become one of Indiana's most important players, and her scoring, rebounding, inside presence, and consistency have made her a legitimate star in her own right. In fact, the irony is hard to miss. Boston and Clark have both become some of the most popular players in the league, and that popularity shows just how much attention this situation has received. The controversy has now become bigger than one MVP opinion. Caitlyn Clark has become such an important figure in women's basketball that even leaving her name out can become a headline. If someone says Clark is their MVP, people debate the reasons. If someone says Clark is not their MVP, people debate that too. But when someone leaves Clark out of the conversation completely, fans immediately start asking what that omission really means.
I'm going to say this and then I'm going to leave it alone, all right? Because I already see the damage control is heavy out here. You had Clark and Sophie, now you got AB and Kelsey. They're trying to get us to get off of Stephanie Mike's back. I feel like she should have been booed. With me, it's baseball. 3 strikes and you're out, all right? Strike 1 for me was Stephanie White. You didn't just come over here to coach the Fever. You had your own personal agenda. The minute you got here, you tried to make it not about Clark. Not about you made AB a hub, which means Clark's not controlling the game anymore. You wanted to slow everything down. You know Clark plays fast.
The bigger question now is whether this actually changes anything between Clark and Boston. Realistically, it may not. Once fans become convinced that there is tension, every small moment can suddenly look like evidence. A missed pass can seem suspicious. A quiet interview can seem suspicious. Even a simple handshake can become suspicious. At this point, someone could probably sneeze on the Fever bench, and social media would create a 12-minute theory explaining why the sneeze was a hidden message. But underneath all the noise is a real basketball question that deserves a serious answer. What should actually determine an MVP? Should it be statistics, efficiency, team success, individual dominance, defensive attention, playmaking, or overall impact? That does not mean established superstars like Aya Wilson should suddenly be pushed out of the conversation. It simply means Clark's name belongs on the table. That may be the real reason this controversy has become so emotional for her supporters. They are not necessarily demanding that Aaliyah Boston name Caitlin Clark as the MVP. They are asking why Clark apparently was not even part of the discussion when her scoring, playmaking, the defensive attention she receives, and her overall impact make her one of the most obvious players to consider.
His own teammate, not even giving her the credit that she deserves. The person that literally spoon feeds AB every single bucket, not even getting the credit. Dude, I'm talking AB. You don't even list her in your top MVP candidates? You're gonna add Caitlin Clark in there, huh, AB? Yeah, you're gonna jump out the window. Kelsey Mitchell. You ain't even gonna add in Caitlin Clark? Caitlin Clark. AB, 50% of that contract should be deposited to Caitlin Clark's bank account every other week.
That is why Boston's opinion has received so much attention. Whether she meant to create controversy or not, the reaction has already happened, and now every future comment about Clark, Buchers, Miles, or the MVP race will probably be viewed through the lens of this moment. The irony is that Boston does not have to change her opinion for Clark to respond to the controversy. Clark can answer it herself the same way she has answered many questions throughout her career, by playing basketball. If she keeps producing while opposing defenses put even more pressure on her, eventually the MVP conversation may become impossible to separate from the very issue fans are arguing about right now. Maybe the real controversy is not that Aaliyah Boston chose someone else. Maybe the real controversy is that Caitlin Clark still seems to have to prove she belongs in conversations that her production and impact have already made impossible to ignore. And if Clark keeps giving the league more reasons to talk about her, one uncomfortable question may eventually become impossible to avoid. If she is not part of the MVP conversation, then exactly how much more does she have to do before everyone finally admits that she belongs?